The first time Daniel realized something was wrong, it wasn't because of a notice in the mail. It wasn't even a phone call. It was the sound of hammers. He had walked the ridgeline at dawn like he always did. The air was still cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. From that height, he could see most of his land, the acres he'd inherited from his father, the same land his grandfather had cleared by hand decades before. It wasn't just property to Daniel. It was legacy, but that morning he heard voices. Not hunters, not hikers. This was the sharp rhythm of construction crews. And when he reached the overlook, his chest tightened. Down below, in the wide clearing near the stream, there were foundations, concrete, rebar, rows of stakes marking out driveways, and lots. Daniel stood frozen, staring. It was impossible. This was his land. He had the deeds, the surveys, the records. And yet, here they were, workers in neon vests, hammering together the skeleton of a neighborhood. 35 homes. He descended fast, boots sliding on loose soil, heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. By the time he reached the edge of the clearing, one of the foremen noticed him. "Hey, sir, this is a hardit zone," the man called out, waving him back. Daniel's voice cut like gravel. "This is my land. What the hell are you building?" "Here?" The man smirked, like he'd heard it before. "Talked to the HOA. They got all the permits. We're just doing our job." The HOA, two words that made Daniel's blood boil. He marched straight to the temporary office trailer parked on site. Inside, behind a folding table, sat Karen, the HOA president. Daniel had dealt with her before, years back, when the association tried to push fees on his property even though he'd never signed their covenants. She was sharp-tongued, polished, and utterly unshakable. "Karen," Daniel growled. "You want to explain why there are 35 houses going up on my land?" Karen didn't flinch. She just folded her manicured hands and smiled a politician's smile. "Daniel, your survey maps are outdated. This parcel was rezoned years ago. The HOA has full development rights." Daniel slammed a calloused hand on the table. "That's a lie. My deed hasn't changed since 1979. My name is on every acre." Her eyes narrowed, but her tone stayed smooth. "Then I suggest you take it up with the county. But until then, Daniel, please don't harass the workers. We wouldn't want a misunderstanding." It was a threat wrapped in politeness. And Daniel left that trailer with his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. That night he sat at his kitchen table, papers spread everywhere. Deeds, plats, tax receipts. All of it proved the land was his. But he knew Karen. She wouldn't risk this kind of development without covering her tracks. Somewhere she greased the right palms, forged the right lines on a survey. Daniel poured a glass of bourbon and stared out at the dark ridge. He wasn't a man who scared easy. But he could feel it. This wasn't going to be a simple fight. This was going to be war. The first battle came faster than he expected. 2 days later he found his fence torn down. Where his "no trespassing" signs once hung, shiny new markers had been bolted in place. And when he pulled one off, a neighbor passing by on a golf cart slowed and shook his head. "You're better off letting it go, Daniel," the man muttered. "They don't lose." Daniel's reply was flat. "Neither do I." But the HOA had more weapons than he imagined. The next morning, a letter appeared in his mailbox. Not typed, handwritten in neat, slanted script. It said only, "Stop interfering or you'll regret it." No signature. No return address. Daniel carried that note inside, sat down, and read it again and again. He'd lived in this community for 20 years. He knew the faces, the families. Who among them had crossed the line into threats? And what did they mean by regret? That night, his old hound, Cooper, started barking. Not the lazy bark of a dog at squirrels. This was frantic, sharp. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the yard. Cooper was by the fence line, fur bristling, teeth bared at the darkness. Beyond, Daniel swept the light across the trees. For a second, he saw movement, a shadow slipping between trunks. By the time he reached the spot, there was nothing but silence. But the smell of cigarette smoke lingered in the air. The next morning, Cooper was gone. Daniel searched the woods for hours, calling until his voice cracked. But there was no trace, no paw prints, no collar. Only another letter. Tucked beneath his truck's windshield wiper, last warning. Daniel's hands trembled as he held that note. They had taken his land, now they had taken his dog. And still Karen smiled at him from across HOA meetings, calm as glass, like none of it touched her. Daniel began documenting everything. Photos of the construction, copies of the notes, recordings of his conversations with Karen, but with each step, the pressure around him grew. Neighbors who once waved now turned cold. Some whispered when he passed, others avoided him entirely. And one night, as he came home, he found his barn door wide open. Inside, his tools were scattered. A single phrase was spray-painted across the wall in dripping black. "Flood us, and you'll drown too." Daniel stood there in the fumes of fresh paint. His fists clenched, they knew. They knew about the dam. For decades, Daniel had controlled the small reservoir upstream. It was old, built by his grandfather, but sturdy. That water was the lifeblood of his land. And now the HOA was daring him, taunting him, to use it, but Daniel wasn't ready. Not yet. He still believed there was a way to fight this with truth. With law, with proof. He didn't know it yet, but the fight was about to drag him into places darker than he'd ever imagined. Because someone close to him, someone he trusted, wasn't on his side at all. And when the betrayal finally came, it would hit harder than any threat the HOA had thrown his way. They say betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people you thought would stand beside you. After the first clash with Karen, I figured she'd keep pressing with paperwork, rules, and city hall petitions. That's how HOA wars usually drag on, but this time she went for my neighbors. One by one I started to notice the shift. Folks I'd known for decades wouldn't meet my eyes. Neighbors I'd helped with broken fences or cleared driveways no longer waved. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, it was quiet. But it cut deeper than anything Karen herself had thrown my way. The first sign came when I found an envelope. Under my door, no return address, just a single line scrawled in sharp ink. If you cared about us, you'd stop fighting. At first I thought it was Karen's doing, but when I looked closer I knew. This wasn't her handwriting. This was one of my neighbors. That night I caught a shadow near my fence line. Someone small, moving quick. By the time I got close, all I saw was the back of a teenager in a hoodie sprinting into the dark. On the ground, a can of red spray paint. Rolled against my boot. The next morning, Karen showed up. She didn't look angry or even smug. She looked entertained. "Daniel," she said, hands folded like she was giving me advice, "I don't need to turn the neighborhood against you. You're doing that yourself." I didn't answer, but the truth of her words lingered longer than I wanted them to. Over the next week, it spread. Whispers on porches when I walked by, cars slowing near my house. And then came the petition, a stack of signatures gathered by Karen herself. She called it a community harmony request. It accused me of obstructing progress, creating hostility, making people feel unsafe. At the bottom I saw names I recognized, people I trusted, even marks, I'll admit. That one stung. That night, sitting on my porch, I looked out at the dam. At the water pressing behind concrete I'd reinforced with my own hands. At the land below, now filled with 35 houses built on soil that should have been mine. And that's when the thought crept in. If they wanted to treat me like a villain, maybe I should remind them what real power looked like. The dam wasn't just stone and steel. It was leverage. It was control. And as I stared out at that dark water under the moonlight, I realized Karen wasn't the only one capable of pulling strings, because storms don't always come from the sky. Sometimes they come from the ground beneath your own neighborhood. They say every man has a line he swears he'll never cross. But when you've been pushed long enough, you start to wonder what might happen if you did. That thought followed me every night now. The dam, the water pressing against its walls, the homes below, built on what should have been mine. It was no longer just a piece of concrete in my land. It was a reminder. And a question. I didn't tell anyone what I was thinking. But the truth had a way of slipping out in small gestures. A comment dropped in the wrong place. A glance held just a second too long. Enough to make people wonder. The first time I tested it, I was standing at the edge of the dam when Karen walked up. She carried a folder. She always did, like. She couldn't breathe without paper in her hands. "Daniel," she said with her fake patience, "you should know the HOA is considering a formal injunction. If you don't cooperate, the county will step in." I looked at her, then I looked at the water, and I smiled. Not a big smile. Just enough for her to notice. "Funny thing about water," I said. "It doesn't care about county lines. Doesn't care about paperwork. It only needs a crack." She stiffened. Her knuckles whitened on that folder. For the first time, I saw her composure bend, just a little, and that was enough word spread faster than I thought it would. A week later, 2 neighbors knocked on my door, a couple from across the cul-de-sac, voices shaky, hands twisting. "Daniel, we heard what you said to Karen," the man started. "You wouldn't actually," I cut him off. "I didn't say anything," I replied flatly. "But maybe you ought to remember who built that dam, who maintains it." Silence. They left without another word. But the fear in their eyes told me what I needed. The seed was planted. Karen, of course, doubled down. She called a special meeting at the community hall. This time it wasn't about fines or ordinances. It was about May sat in the back, arms crossed, watching as she paraded a slideshow of so-called concerns. Photos of cracks in the dam, exaggerated with close-up angles. Charts predicting flooding zones with red circles right over those. 35 houses. She even played a grainy recording of my words. "It only needs a crack," neighbors gasped. Some glared at me like I'd already committed a crime. Others whispered like scared children. When the meeting ended, I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked out. Because sometimes silence is louder than anything you could say. But here's the thing. When you hold that kind of power, even if you never use it, it attracts attention. Not just from those who fear you, from those who see opportunity late. One night I went down to the dam. The air was heavy, the kind of dampness that sticks to your skin. I carried my flashlight, sweeping the concrete. That's when I saw it. Fresh tool marks along one of the maintenance hatches. Bolts loosened. Mud disturbed where someone had knelt recently. Someone had been here. I tightened the bolts, checked the locks twice. But the unease didn't leave me. Because whoever it wasn't me the next day. Karen showed up again. This time she didn't look confident. She looked rattled. Her blouse was wrinkled, her voice sharper than usual. "Daniel, you've got people terrified. They're saying they've seen lights. Down by the dam at night, work crews, strangers." I raised an eyebrow. "Not mine," I said. "But if someone else is tampering with my property, maybe you should look closer at your own board." Her jaw clenched. And for the first time, she didn't have a retort. The paranoia spread. Neighbors started driving by the dam at night, headlights cutting across the water. Some claimed they saw shadows moving. Others swore they heard grinding metal, rushing water. Truth was, I heard those things too. I just didn't know if it was real. Or in my head. One evening, Mark showed up at my porch. His face looked worn, eyes sunken. "Don," he said quietly, "Karen's not the only one stirring the pot. Someone else wants that dam gone." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "There's talk about a developer, not just Karen's HOA plans. A company that's been sniffing around for months. If the dam fails, even partially, it opens the whole area for reconstruction. Bigger projects. More money than you can imagine." It made sense. Too much sense, because while everyone thought this was about Karen and me, maybe it was bigger. Maybe we were both pawns in someone else's game. That night I stood again at the edge of the dam. The moonlight shimmered. On the black water, restless and heavy, I ran my hand along the concrete, feeling the vibrations deep in my palm. Not cracks, not weakness, pressure, the kind that could either protect or destroy. And in that moment I realized something chilling. Karen was scared of me. The neighbors feared the dam. But someone else out there, someone wanted it to break, and if I didn't figure out who and why, this war wasn't just going to end in signatures or fines. It was going to end in a flood. I was standing on the dam again, not because I wanted to. Because I had to. The locks on the hatch had been cut clean. Fresh gouges scarred the steel. Someone had been back. And this time, they weren't just loosening bolts. They were ready to finish the job. I didn't hear Karen walk up. Her heels clicked against the concrete like gunshots. "You did this, didn't you?" She snapped. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from rage. "You want everyone to think it's the HOA? After your dam? But it's you. You want to flood us." I turned slowly. She wasn't alone. Half the board stood behind her, neighbors too. Even Market was like a trial on the water's edge. And I was the accused. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you think I'd destroy my own land? My own legacy?" She jabbed her finger at me. "Don't you dare talk about legacy. You're holding us hostage with that dam. You enjoy watching people suffer. Fines, rules, none of that matters anymore. You're a threat, Daniel, and we're done living in fear." Her words rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others whispered. And then Mark stepped forward. Here's the first shock. Mark wasn't on my side, not anymore. "Don," he said, voice heavy. I told him what I found. About the developer. About the offers you've been getting. My blood ran cold. "What offers?" I demanded. Karen smirked. She pulled out a folder, thicker than usual. Inside were letters, contracts, checks with my name on them. "Ironic, isn't it?" she sneered. "While you've been painting yourself as the victim, you've been negotiating to sell the land, to profit off the same homes you swore were yours. You talk about betrayal? Look in the mirror." Gasps cut the night air. Eyes turned sharp. Murmurs hissed like snakes. But here's the thing. Those letters weren't mine. They were forged, and if I knew anything about handwriting, Karen had a shaky wrist, I should have defended myself. I should have shouted the truth. But something in me stopped. Because right then, another realization slammed into me harder than the accusations, the hatch, the cut bolts. The loosened lockset wasn't just vandalism. It was staged. Not by Karen, not by the board, by someone who wanted us all gathered here, on this dam. At this exact moment, the second shock came like thunder. The ground trembled, not from an earthquake. From the dam itself, a roar built beneath us. Metal groaned. Water surged. The hatch that had been tampered with blew open. A geyser of black water shot into the air, spraying across the concrete. People screamed. Karen stumbled back, clutching her papers. Mark grabbed the railing. Chaos. Panic. The flood had begun. I ran for the valve house, heart pounding like a drum. But when I got there, I froze. Someone was already inside. A figure in. A hard hat, reflective vest, not a neighbor, not an HOA member, a worker. No, a saboteur. He pulled the last lever and smiled. "Orders are orders," he said coldly. "Nothing personal." Before I could stop him, he slipped out through the emergency hatch and vanished into the night. The dam shuddered again. Water poured faster. Concrete split like bones. Cracking under weight, I turned the wheels, fought the controls, tried to slow the surge. My arms burned, my lungs screamed. But it wasn't enough. The dam was going. And so was everything below. I stumbled out, soaked and shaking. Karen was on her knees, papers ruined, hair plastered to her face. She looked up at me with wild eyes. "Stop it," she cried. "Do something." And that was the irony. The woman who spent years trying to strip me of control now begged me to take it back. I shouted to the crowd. "Get to higher ground." Now. People scattered, slipping, screaming, clutching children, dragging pets. Cars roared to life, headlights flashing. The hillside lit up in chaos, and I stayed. Because if I didn't, none of them had a chance. I don't remember how long I fought. Those valves, minutes felt like hours. Every wheel I turned slowed the water just enough, not to save the homes. No, those were already lost. But to save the lives, the 35 houses below were swallowed in the surge. Wood, glass, furniture, all ripped away like twigs, but the people, most of them made it. And when the water settled, when the night fell quiet again, I stood. Alone on what was left of the dam, Karen approached me. Her face was pale, her voice soft. "You saved them," she whispered. Then, bitterly, "But you destroyed everything else." I met her gaze. "No, someone else did." "You wanted to ruin me, Karen, but you were just another pawn, same as me." She didn't answer, because deep down she knew it was true. Weeks later, the investigation revealed what I already suspected. A developer hidden behind shell companies had hired contractors to sabotage the dam. Karen's forged papers, planted to frame me. The panic? Engineered to clear the land for profit, and the cruelest part? They almost got away with it, but here's where the justice came. The saboteur, the man in the vest, was caught. And when he cracked, he spilled everything: names, contracts, payments. Turns out, the same developer had also been funding Karen's HOA, the fines, the meetings, the push to seize my land. She wasn't the mastermind. She was the bait-hand when the truth hit the neighborhood. Her reign was over. Not with a vote, not with a trial. With silence. No one trusted her anymore. No one listened. She became the ghost of her own empire. As for me, I lost the dam, I lost the land. But I kept my name, and I kept the respect of people who finally saw what I had been fighting all along. And sometimes, that's all a man needs to walk forward. When I look at the river now, I think about control. How we cling to it, fight for it. Like cheat, steal for it, but water taught me something. You can't hold it forever. You can only guide it and pray it doesn't rise against you. So that was my story. How 35 homes stood on stolen ground, and how in one night the water took them back. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you loved this insane ride, don't forget to subscribe. Because there are more HOA stories out there, each wilder than the last.